The emergency klaxons wailed through Outpost Kepler 7 at 0600 hours, sending Commander Tharek stumbling out of his bunk with his plasma rifle already charging. His forearms moved with practiced efficiency, two reaching for his armor plating while the other two checked his tactical display. "Report!" He barked into the comm, his mandibles clicking with agitation. The response came from his second-in-command, a Vraxian whose name translated roughly to "Stone That Breaks Waves." "Sir, it's not an attack. It's the humans again." Therek's primary eyes narrowed while his secondary pair rolled in exasperation. "What have they done now?" "You need to see this yourself, Commander." 5 minutes later, Tharek stood in the observation deck overlooking the containment habitat, and what he saw made his blood run cold for entirely different reasons than he'd expected. 12 Krevter Cubs apex predators from a death world so hostile that even the Galactic Council had classified it as a no-approach zone were lined up in neat rows. Their obsidian scales gleamed under the artificial lights, razor-sharp claws retracted, and their multiple rows of teeth visible as their mouths opened in unison. "Good morning, Commander Tharek!" They roared, their juvenile vocal cords still capable of shattering reinforced glass at close range. Behind them stood Specialist Lyra Ven, the human xenobiologist who had somehow convinced Command to let her study the rescued cubs. She was grinning, that peculiar human expression that showed teeth but somehow indicated pleasure rather than threat. "Morning, sir," she called out cheerfully, giving a small wave. "We've been working on greetings. The cubs wanted to show you their progress." Tariq felt a headache forming behind his primary eyes. "Specialist Ven, it is 0600 hours. The entire base believes we are under attack." "Oh," Lyra had the decency to look slightly sheepish. "Yeah, we probably should have warned you. But look how well they're doing. 3 weeks ago, they couldn't even understand the concept of a nonviolent greeting." One of the cubs Tharek thought it might be the one Lyra had named Chomper, broke formation and bounded toward the observation window. Its tail, which could bisect a combat drone, wagged with what could only be described as enthusiasm. "Good morning!" It bellowed again, this time adding a move that looked suspiciously like a human salute, albeit performed with a clawed appendage the size of Therek's torso. The Galactic Federation had strict protocols about Death World predators. They were to be avoided, contained, or if absolutely necessary, eliminated. Humans, being from a Death World themselves, had been initially classified under the same protocols until they'd somehow talked, traded, and occasionally charmed their way into becoming valued members of the Federation. Tharek was beginning to understand how they'd managed it. "Specialist," he said, trying to maintain his composure, "I approved your research on the basis that you would keep these creatures contained and non-threatening." "This is non-threatening," Lyra interrupted, her enthusiasm undimmed. "So that's exactly what this is. In Krefter culture, the morning roar is how packs establish territory and warn off rivals. By teaching them a greeting instead, we're redirecting an instinctive behavior into something constructive. It's actually brilliant when you think about it. It triggered every security system on the base. We'll work on volume control," Lyra promised. "But sir, you have to see what else they've learned." Before Tharek could protest, Lyra had activated the habitat door and stepped inside. Every instinct of Tharek had developed over 30 years of military service screamed at him to sound the alarm, to flood the habitat with suppression gas, to do something. Instead, he watched in horrified fascination as 12 apex predators swarmed the human. They didn't attack, they nuzzled, they play-bowed. They carefully, with the kind of precision that should have been impossible for creatures with claws that size, bumped their heads against Lyra's outstretched hands. "Good morning, Razor. Good morning, Spike." "Yes, Chomper." "Good morning to you too," Lyra murmured, somehow knowing each cub individually despite their nearly identical appearance to Therek's eyes. One of the smaller cubs, though, smaller was relative when discussing creatures that would grow to the size of assault vehicles, chirped. At Lyra, it was a surprisingly delicate sound coming from something with a jaw that could crush starship hull plating. "You want to show the commander?" Lyra asked. The cub chirped again. "Okay, everyone, formation beta." The cubs immediately arranged themselves into a different pattern. Then, with a coordination that would have made Therek's own soldiers envious, They began to perform what could only be described as a demonstration of combat maneuvers, except, instead of targeting enemies, they were carefully navigating around obstacle courses, working together to solve puzzles and responding to hand signals from Lyra. "You see, sir," Lyra explained as she directed the cubs through their paces, "Krevdar aren't just mindless predators. They're incredibly intelligent, highly social, and capable of complex reasoning. The Federation classified them as threats because no one bothered to try communicating with them. They just saw teeth and claws and assumed the worst." Tharik watched as Chomper gently picked up a delicate sensor array in his mouth and carefully placed it on a platform, despite the fact that those same jaws could have reduced it to powder. "Humans tried talking to them," Lyra continued, "and it turned out they wanted to talk back. By 0630 hours, word had spread throughout the base. Scientists, soldiers, and support staff crowded the observation deck. They watched as the cubs continued their morning routine, which apparently included breakfast. Tharik tried not to think too hard about what they were eating, group play, and what Lara called socialization exercises. "How did you do this?" Tharik finally asked. "How did you take creatures that the entire Federation fears and turn them into ... Lyra smiled. That human expression that Tharik was beginning to understand meant something deeper than simple pleasure. "We didn't turn them into anything, sir. We just saw what they already were beneath the scary exterior. Humans are pretty good at that. We've had a lot of practice with our own predators back on Earth. Dogs, cats, even bears in some cases. We learned a long time ago that dangerous and evil aren't the same thing." One of the cubs, apparently bored with the current activity, had noticed the crowd in the observation deck. It padded over and pressed its snout against the transparasteel, breath fogging the surface. Then, loud enough to rattle the walls, but somehow less threatening than before, it rumbled, "Good morning, everyone!" The effect was instantaneous. Several people jumped. A few reached for weapons they weren't carrying. But then, hesitantly at first, voices began responding. "Good morning," someone called back. "Morning, little guy," another added, voice shaky but genuine. Soon the entire observation deck was calling out greetings, and the cubs were responding with what Tharik could now recognize as joy. Lyra stood in the habitat, surrounded by creatures that could end her life in an instant, looking up at the observation deck with tears in her eyes. "This is why we're out here," she said softly into her cum, knowing Tharik could hear. "Not to conquer or contain, but to connect. To find common ground in the most unlikely places. Because at the end of the day, maybe we're all just looking for someone to say good morning to." Tharik deactivated his weapon systems for good. "Good morning, Specialist Ven," he said. "Good morning, Commander." And somewhere in the depths of space, on a small outpost on the edge of known territory, the Dawn Chorus continued predator cubs and their human teacher, proving that the universe was far stranger, far kinder, and far more full of possibility than anyone had dared to imagine.